Wakairi! Welcome back to my channel, May Between the Pages. My name is Taylor, and today we're going to be doing my June wrap-up. Now, you may have noticed a couple things are different. Obviously, my hair. We're not surprised by now on my channel. I love to dye my hair, change my hair. This time, it's a little more purpley. I'm digging it. I'm loving it. Fresh cut always makes me feel good. So that's one thing. The other thing is that I tweaked my lighting situation a little bit here. So it's got a bit of a different vibe to it, and I just want to know what you guys think. If you like this style lighting better or kind of the warmer style that I typically do, I'd love to hear feedback from you guys about that. I've also gotten some requests for plant content in my last couple videos where I asked you guys if you were interested, and you guys said that you were. Unfortunately, the plants that we have outside are struggling in this heat right now because it is Hades motherfucking hot here. Like, I don't blame the plants for struggling, so the timing's actually not the best for that, but I figured I would put some of my babies in the background here. So this is a pothos that I've had for many, many years. It's one of my favorite plants, so I figured I would put her in the background, maybe change out this plant I have behind me every now and then. So you might be seeing some different plant babies pop into the background as little mini plant content. But after all of that intro, let's go ahead and get to the books. Now, I mentioned in my last couple wrap-ups that I have really started to hone in on what I enjoy in books. I really have honed in on my taste. I'm really good at picking books that work for me, and that pattern has shown a lot of 4 and 5 stars popping up in my reviews, and this month is also no exception. There were 2 books that didn't reach the 4-star mark for me, but the rest of them did, and it was just a great reading month overall. I ended up reading 9 books this month throughout a whole range of different genres, so it was a very diverse month for me in that regard. The first book I read was Talking to Dragons. This is the 4th book in the Enchanted Forest Chronicles, and this is a middle grade series. I loved this series when I was young. I checked it out from the library multiple times. I've mentioned it in a couple of the vlogs that I've had recently on my channel and a couple of the wrap-ups as well, so I'll go ahead and link those down below. But this is the conclusion to that series, right? Right? It's the conclusion, right? I feel like I gotta check that now. Okay, yeah, it's the conclusion. All right. So the first 2 books in this series, upon reread as an adult, I loved. They were, I think, both 5 stars. I think I gave them both 5. The witty banter, the humor that is put into these books just brought me a lot of joy. But the 3rd book was a disappointment. It was a huge nosedive in quality, in my opinion. But the 4th book kind of brought it back up. It wasn't quite to the level of the first 2, but it was enjoyable. So when I first read this book, I gave it 4 stars. I think part of it was from like the relief of, you know, it not being as bad as the 3rd book. But upon reflection, I think I'm going to drop it down to a 3. The real rating being probably a 3.5, but on Goodreads, I'm going to drop it down to a 3 because it was good and I enjoyed it, but it didn't give me the joy of the first 2. So this was an enjoyable read. I would still recommend the series because the conclusion is satisfying. It just wasn't completely consistent all the way through. This series follows a princess named Cimarine in a world where fairy tales are real and expected. So a lot of princesses, you know, do normal princessy things and wait to be rescued, you know, by a prince. But Cimarine is not interested in that. She wants to take a more active role in life. So, in order to escape the life of a typical princess, she runs away to dragons and asks one of these dragons to kidnap her. She volunteers herself to be kidnapped. And the story kind of goes from there, about her adventures with these dragons, and there are wizards and other fairy tale creatures that pop up, and there's a lot of witty story twisting done in the first 2 books and in the 4th book with your typical fairy tale stories. And it's a very enjoyable middle grade. The next book I read was The Deep by Nick Cutter. So you may recognize this author because his book, The Troop, is very popular, and I mentioned it in previous wrap-ups because it's a book that I ended up having to DNF because of the triggers of animal torture in that book. So I decided to give another book by him a shot that is consistently in a genre that I seem to like, which is horror or thrillers associated with the deep ocean. I have a deep-rooted and all-consuming fear of the deep ocean. So I'm never gonna go down there myself, and I seem to have this morbid curiosity of reading books or watching media about that part of the world. So actually, if you see behind me, one of my favorite books is Into the Drowning Deep here by Mira Grant. This is a horror novel about deep sea mermaids that are murderous and kill people. And it's fantastic, I love it. So I thought the deep would be really calling my name. I ended up giving this book 3 stars. It gave me that kind of creepy feeling of a more psychological horror or thriller book. And it did that really well up until I'd say about 60% through. And then I felt like it was just dragging, like the same psychological traumas would happen over and over again. And at this point, I was thinking more like, oh man, this again, rather than, oh no, this again. Like I should be scared to see that thing come back. But I felt not scared, less scared, like I had become numb to that kind of cycle during the last part of the book. And I'm new to horror, so I'm not super learned in how that's usually handled in the genre. All I know is that in this particular book, it felt too long for the psychological aspect to continue to be terrifying. So I think if it was shorter, I would have liked it more. But I did like the undersea aspect of it, the crushing depths and the psychological things that can happen to you when you're down that deep in the ocean, because this book also, again, took place in the Mariana Trench. This book is set in a world where a disease has taken over, the world. Good timing for this in our nice parallels to our world itself. But there's a disease that's taken over the world that makes people forget who they are and turn them into basically shells of humans until they forget to eat, forget how to live, and they end up dying. So it's a very slow, painful disease. And they want to find a cure for this. And they think they found a cure at the bottom of the Marianas Trench. And our main character's brother is a brilliant but maybe psychopathic genius scientist who has been sent down to try to find this cure. And our main character gets summoned by those who are running this mission because his brother supposedly has called for him to come down. He needs him for something. And so him and a couple other characters go down into the depths and things occur. I didn't regret reading this or anything, but it just wasn't my favorite. The next book, however, was a favorite, and that is Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. You can tell it was a favorite by the fact that I have the special edition with me. I ended up purchasing the Farseer trilogy in the special editions because I loved this book so much. I ended up giving it 4.5 stars because there was a section in the middle that dragged a bit for me. Even though I cared so deeply for these characters, for Fitz and everyone else around him, there was a part in the middle where I was like, okay, we can move it along a little bit. But the ending blew my mind. I loved the plot twists. It was worth the wait. So overall, I gave this 4.5 stars. I think on Goodreads, I rounded it up to a 5. But I'm so excited to continue with this series. Essentially, we follow our main character, Fitz, as he grows up. This is very much a coming-of-age story following our main character. This is called An Assassin's Apprentice, and he is an apprentice. It's true to its name. He does menial work, he cleans up horse shit and, cleans bathrooms. Like he does what you would expect an apprentice to do while he's learning. But I didn't mind at all being with him during these menial tasks. I grew to love him and appreciate him, and I wanted the best for him. Unfortunately, he doesn't get what's best for him very often. And there was one part in this book that made me cry. If you've read this book, you probably know what I'm talking about. But I was like, this is a dream, right? This is the dream. And then it wasn't, and I was really upset. I did capture that reaction on camera. I do have a vlog that I made of this, but I think what I'm gonna do is combine it into a Farseer trilogy vlog. So you'll have to wait to see that for a little while. But I was shattered by that one part in this book. So yeah, I loved this. It gave me so many emotions, and the writing style is beautiful. Robin Hobb's writing style just hits my heart where I didn't know I needed it. It's got this like warmth to it. I've heard other people say this as well, and I absolutely agree. It's got this warmth to it that just like welcomes you home, even if you've never read it before. So the descriptions and that warm feeling just sucked me right in. And I also loved the writing style of like the narrator knows things that the character doesn't know at the time, right? So the narrator telling this story has knowledge the characters in the story don't have. And the way that that is kind of expressed and how that's done in the writing is beautifully done, because it allows the reader to be like, oh, I caught that, but Fitz in the story doesn't catch that. So later when he realizes it, you can feel smart as a reader, like, huh, how'd you not know that? I already knew that. And that's done so well throughout this whole story. Royal Assassin is on my TBR for this month. I haven't gotten to it yet, but I really, really want to, because I've heard a lot of people say that is their favorite in the trilogy, and I'm just excited to see where Fitz goes from here. The next book I read is extremely different in both genre and feel, and that is Bayou Magic. This is a middle grade book, and I picked this book up expecting to like it because I've heard really good things from people that I trust with their reading tastes. And they were correct. This was a super cute, but also at the same time very deep middle grade book about a girl who goes to visit her grandmother who lives in the bayou, and she starts to discover her roots and who she really is. So our main character, Maddie, lives in the city, and her, I think it's 2 sisters or 3 other sisters, each take turns spending a summer with their grandmother in the bayou. And her other sisters have already done this, and now it's her turn. And the descriptions of this place as she learns about it, as she connects to it, are gorgeous. It made me want to go to the bayou, and I hate humid places where I can't see what's below me in the water. And it made me want to go. It made it sound beautiful and enchanting, and just, you know, so close to the essence of what nature really is. And that was probably my favorite part of the whole book, was getting to know the bayou and fall in love with the bayou along with Maddie. While Maddie is there, she sees a mermaid, but no one can see the mermaid except for her. So throughout this book, you learn what the significance of that is and how that, you know, changes her life. I'm not going to say more than that because this is a short book, as it's a, you know, middle grade, and I think it's fun to discover that along the way. This book deals with themes of climate change, pollution, and finding out your roots and who you are and what you care about. So I thought that those themes were really well handled. The story was beautiful. But for me, the writing style really didn't hit in other ways. So the style of this author is to write in very short, choppy sentences, and often that pulled me out of the story. I don't need purple prose, but I need more than what I got from this book. Usually writing style isn't a huge deal for me, but this one just didn't connect with me very well. And like I said, it pulled me out of the story or took some of the emotional impact away because I was distracted by how it was written. So all in all, I ended up giving this book a 3.5 stars, but on Goodreads I had to round it down to a 3. But I still think this is absolutely worth your time. I don't hear many people talking about it, and I think there are a lot of people who could connect to this story. So I definitely highly recommend you pick this one up. It was a very good read, and I read it in like one or 2 sittings. Okay. This next one was my favorite one this month, and it shocked me. I read this as the group book for the Ghibli readathon that I was taking part in, and it blew me away, and that is Howl's Moving Castle. If you notice, this is the nice slipcase edition from Folio Society. This is my first Folio Society book, but I like browsed their page hoping one day I would purchase something, and this edition of Howl's Moving Castle has always caught my attention. But I hadn't read it yet, and I wasn't willing to drop the money on a Folio Society book if I wasn't sure. And after reading it and falling in love with it, I knew this was the edition I had to get. So if we take this out of the dust jacket, put that down over here, we have this absolutely stunning edition of Howl's Moving Castle. I'm obsessed. Yeah, the end pages are also gorgeous. The quality of this book is fantastic. The pages, just everything is beautiful. There's also illustrations inside. Let me see if I could find an illustration. They are avoiding me, of course, because I want to show you one. So here's one. It's got a very fairy tale-esque feel to it. The quality is shiny. It's a gorgeous edition of this book. And there's lots of, headings over the chapters as well. So yeah, this is well worth the money. It's gorgeous. So let me actually talk about the story itself. Those of you who don't know, this is the original version of Howl's Moving Castle. The Ghibli movie was based on this. They did take a lot of liberties with it and changed a lot of things within the story, but I still think both of them are just different but equal. I love the Ghibli movie. I've watched it for years. It isn't my favorite, but I've always enjoyed it. And after reading this book, it actually bumped the movie up as on my list of favorites of Ghibli movies because I had more of an appreciation and understanding for the story as a whole. Typically, I hear that people who like the movie don't like the book, and people who like the book don't like the movie, but I don't fall into those categories. I think that they really complement each other. This book follows Sophie, who is a hat maker. It's her family business, and she's really not sure what she wants for her future. She's kind of resigned to the fact that she'll be taking over the hat business, even though she doesn't really have any passion for it. And she's kind of floundering with what to do with that. And then she has an unlucky encounter with the Witch of the Waste, who transforms her into an old woman. And Sophie decides, well, she can't just hang around as an old woman and expect no one to see anything different. So she leaves to try to see if she can figure out how to change this. And after she leaves, she ends up coming in contact with Howl's Moving Castle. Howl being a sorcerer who is known to steal women's hearts and eat them. So, not many people like to encounter this castle, but she ends up coming in contact with it, and we meet such wonderful characters. The whimsy of this book is off the charts. It's beautiful. I love the concept of the castle, and Calcifer, who I don't want to give too much away about the story, but he's my favorite character in this entire story, in the movie and this book. I love Calcifer so much, and it just brought me so much joy. I could not stop reading this. I could not put it down. So I really want to reread this version and experience it in this beautiful edition. But this book it sunk into my heart, and it's going to be there forever. I adored it. This next book is going to be my one and only DNF for this month, and that is The Bird Eater. Now, this is not the fault of the book. Kind of like The Troop, I didn't really do research into what the themes of this were. I was just looking for a thriller to listen to on audiobook, as that's my favorite medium to read them in, and I just picked this one randomly. This book is about ghosts, an extremely creepy book about ghosts. And while I can't handle animal torture, that's like one of my main triggers, the theme of ghosts is not for me. I am such a little bitch. I am such a baby. Like, I cannot watch horror movies about ghosts, like Ju-on or, The Ring. Count me the fuck out. No. Like, I can watch serial killer stuff all day or gore stuff all day because I can kill those people. Ghosts? What are you gonna do? What? You're screwed, And I don't enjoy that type of fear, that creeping fear, that can pop up at any time. So when I started reading this book and realized what the theme was and how much it really leaned on this ghost aspect, I couldn't do it. So I DNF'd it at 10%. I have seen reviews for this some are good, some are bad. So maybe if you're more learned or less of like a scaredy cat when it comes to ghost things, this would be fine for you. It wouldn't be that scary. But for me, I couldn't do it. So I DNF'd this book at 10% and moved on. What I do know about this book is it's like a haunted house thing where there's a little boy who haunts the house, this this man's house that he grew up in, and his family has all died in the house thanks to this ghost boy. And as most people do in horror movies, he's a dumbass, decides to move back to the place and try to fix it up. And when I DNF'd it, things were starting to happen. So there's that. The next book I read was Sorrowland by River Solomon. I love The Deep by River Solomon. I actually have it behind me. I think I can pull it out. It's pretty easy to access. The Deep by the same author. I adore this book. It tackled so many things in this small amount of pages, and it gave me so many emotions and feelings and things to think about. I adore this book, and I definitely plan to reread it in the near future. So when I saw that River Solomon was releasing a new book, I knew I had to read it. Sorrowland is such a unique book. I've never read anything like it, and I don't think I ever will again. It's like a fever dream of a novel. It's so, I don't know how to describe it. Like, even though I've read this book and I know what it's about, I can't describe to you like the way things happen, the way things are described. It's just, I don't know, it's so unique. So that aspect of it, I'll never forget for sure. But basically we follow our main character, can't remember names right now, shocker, pop it up on the screen. But we follow our main character, and she is raised on a very religious cult compound where she has no contact with the outside world. And it's surrounded by these woods that are said to, you know, spell your death if you go into them. You will be murdered by someone who keeps people from leaving. But throughout some circumstances, our main character, who is very defiant, very visceral in the amount of life she has inside her, she decides it's worth it to run away. So she goes into these woods and ends up, you know, forging a life for herself. And throughout the story, we find out the truth about this compound and what the real story is behind all of this. This is really rare for me to do, but I think that my Goodreads review really sums up to a T how I felt right after reading this book, because it's been a while. And since it's such like a visceral, like I said, fever dream of a novel, I want to read a small portion of this review on camera here. I love River Solomon's writing and the beauty of it shown through this novel just as much as the previous book I read by them, The Deep. I love the concept of regeneration and rebirth explored in this book. I also put a quote here from the book that says, "The forest turns sorrows into flowers." Beautiful, poetic. I love that quote so much. Vibrant life, be it benevolent or otherwise, will find a way to survive. And survive it does in the formidable body of our main character, Vern. She is at once captivating and exasperating, and I loved following her journey as she finds out the truth of her home. Howling and Feral were my absolute favorites. The unbridled spirit of children left to their own curiosity is wonderful to read about. That snippet of my review really sums up like all the positive feelings that I had for this novel. Howling and Feral are Vern's two children, and I loved how the unbridled spirit of children, like I said, is explored in this book. I think that was beautifully done. However, for me, this book ended up being a 4-star rather than a 5 because the last 20 to 30% of this book really dragged for me. It just felt too long, and I didn't feel a desire to pick the book back up. Like, I would listen to it and be into it when I was listening to it, but if I put it down for some reason, I didn't feel a desire to pick it back up in that last 20 to 30%. So that really slowed my enjoyment of this story. I think if it had been cut, you know, shorter, I would have loved it, you know, all the way through. But regardless, it is one of the most unique reads I've ever experienced, and I highly recommend you pick it up if you're curious. This next book is actually a self-published work that was sent to me by the author. So first and foremost, I want to say thank you so much to the author for reaching out and sending this to me. I know it takes a brave soul to reach out and offer your work to be read and criticized. So first off, major props to you for that bravery, and thank you for sending it to me. This book is called The Trouble with Wanting and Other Not Quite Fairy Tales. This is a collection of short stories that have the vibes of fairy tales, but maybe don't follow their prescribed, you know, progression, their usual progression, beat for beat. I love folklore, I love fairy tales and short stories with that kind of atmosphere, so this book was definitely up my alley. When I was reading this book, I loved the atmosphere of all of the stories. I thought that the whimsy of them was beautifully written. I loved there was this like attention to kind of old wives' tales or old like remedies, you know, using bone dust for, you know, protection. Or I've mentioned a couple times on my channel that I love that type of kind of old wives' tale remedy, you know, culture. So there was a lot of attention to that in these stories, and I loved that aspect of them. So every story was very fresh and unique, and I didn't know what I was gonna get when I started the next one, so that was also something that was very joyful for me when I was reading this. However, the dialogue of these characters didn't match the settings very well for me. You would have like this kind of rustic, very fae-like, beautifully described setting with very modern dialogue, and that pulled me out of the story more than once, and it was something that just didn't work for me. Also, the motivations and the feelings of all the characters were very explicitly stated throughout the story. So this character feels this way, so they did this. And that can be fine in a book. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but the whimsical kind of fairy tale nature of these stories didn't match that explicitly stated nature of, you know, the character arcs for me. So that kind of disconnect there also pulled me out of the story a couple times, or kind of lost the magic for me. Overall, I really enjoyed this collection. My favorite two were Just Perfect and Her Homesick Spirit. I thought both of these were really well done stories, and I enjoyed them from beginning to end. So I would definitely recommend this to someone who wants to read a very unique collection of short stories. Overall, I ended up giving it a 3 stars. The last thing I read this month was a manga called Spy Family. Now, I only have the first one currently, so that's what I'm holding up, but I read, I think, the 3rd and the 4th installments in this. There are 6 total plus an extra story, and I blew through these when I sat down to read them. I enjoyed them immensely. They've all gotten 5 stars from me this far. The 5 stars for this is very much based on my enjoyment that I get. I just love the wild ride of this story. So we follow our main character, who is a spy. He is the best spy that his country has. And in order to do his next mission, he needs to have a family as part of his disguise. So through some circumstances, he ends up meeting a woman to pretend to be his wife, and he also adopts a random child to pretend to be his daughter. What he doesn't know is that the wife is an assassin and a hitman, and the daughter can read minds. So we have this family who has bonded together to keep a facade to the outside world as a happy family, but they're also individually keeping their own true nature from each other. So it just leads to really interesting and hilarious situations. The humor in this really hits my humor perfectly. So far, out of the first like 3 or 4 volumes, I am loving this. That concludes my June wrap-up. Now, you may notice that there are quite a few books missing from the TBR that I had for the readathon I was doing, the Ghibli readathon. I did not do well with my readathon prompts. I think I definitely didn't complete the bingo. I think I might have completed the prompts for my movie that I picked, which was Spirited Away. I think I did complete that, but the bingo board just didn't happen. And some of that is because some of the books got rolled over to this current month, July. I'm doing a buddy read for both the Jasmine Throne and Priory of the Orange Tree, which were on my TBR, but I pushed to this month in order to participate in these buddy reads. So, you know, those on purpose were not finished, but there were quite a few other books that I just didn't get to. So while I did have a good reading month, I did not do so hot with the readathon. But either way, I had so much fun participating in the readathon. The Discord was a blast. I may have, not promising anything, but I'm thinking I will have a tutorial for making some Ghibli food coming your way up on my channel. I have to arrange that and make sure it's as I want, but I'm thinking it will be coming your way soon. You know, I'm just a huge fan of Ghibli. You can see the Kodama behind me, and I just enjoyed being in that environment for a month. So even though I didn't complete the prompts, I'm really glad I participated. Let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of these books, if you have the same opinions as me or you disagree. I'd love to chat with you guys down below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click that bell. It really helps me with the algorithm, and I appreciate it. But for now, I'm gonna head out. じゃあね!